Welcome to Vision Chat, a podcast about spiritual topics, with your hosts, Virginia and Stine. Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Virginia and I'm in Chicago, and I'm here with Stine in Norway. Hi, Stine.
Hello.
And today we are doing something a little different. We typically discuss individual spiritual journeys that our guests experience. But today we want to focus our conversation on a specific topic. We're going to talk about toxic spiritual communities, red flags, warning signs, and ways to help someone heal from these experiences. So whether you're the one involved in a toxic spiritual community, or it's someone that you love, or you're just curious and want to learn more about them, we hope this talk helps. We have a very special return guest to help us out today, Jenny Korotko, the Approachable Healer, owner and founder of Jenny Korotko Counseling and Art Therapy in Chicago. Jenny has been on our show before. You can find her episode in season 1. We highly recommend that you go back and listen to that episode to learn more about Jenny and her spiritual journey. In the meantime, hi, Jenny, and welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. So we thought we could start with kind of just talking about, I think, we want to talk about toxic spiritual communities, but maybe defining like, I don't know, what a spiritual community is for people. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a kind of an umbrella. Like spiritual community could be church for some people, temple. It could be aligning with like a belief system. It could be, I would even consider a group of people that gather to talk about things like tarot card readings and stuff as like a spiritual community. I think it really could describe a lot of different ways we gather and focus on similar things.
I was going to say, well, we can consider ourselves a spiritual community right here, right now.
Exactly.
Us. Right. Okay. So that's not a bad thing. These are positive things. People want to come together and find things in common to talk about and form relationships with each other. Where I guess does the line become blurry between a healthy spiritual community and a toxic one?
I think so. I don't know what the word is. I think I'm lucky because I'm a somatic experiencing trauma therapist and I pay very close attention to my body. So my answer is when you feel something's wrong in your gut, then there's a line being crossed somewhere for you. And it might not be the same for the person next to you. So what is healing for each of us might be different. And if we're going to these spiritual communities to heal or align with like-minded people and continue on our paths, and we have that gut instinct that something doesn't feel right, again, it might be different for somebody else who's still feeling the healing, or maybe they're just not in touch with the gut instinct themselves. So there's that as well. And that's why I started with, I'm lucky to have my expertise behind me so I can really pay close attention to and honor those gut instincts and get curious about them, where I think as a society, we tend to just bypass them because there's that whole thing of groupthink. Like, well, I feel this is off, but everybody else is really into it. So I guess I'll just stay.
Yeah,
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you absolutely did. And I think because it's a hard question to answer, because I was also reflecting on like, well, what may be something that I consider toxic for myself may not be the same for someone else that's in the same group going through the same things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's tough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's what kind of kept me in certain circles longer, because I was reflecting on that. Like, maybe this isn't right for me, but there's still some things about it that are. But then there is a line that was crossed, I think, not just for me personally, but in like for the whole group, when it felt like things were getting unsafe. So I think that's an answer for your question, is when things feel unsafe for the majority, that's when the line is crossed.
I'm really curious, do you feel like because of your own experience that you can go back and kind of look at things that you might have missed? that you were like, huh, I kind of had a sense that that was a little off, but I kind of didn't really listen. And I thought, well, it should be okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think early on, just the way payments were made felt off. So there's ethics with that. But then I have such a rebellious side where I'm like, like we're nickeled and dimed as professionals so much with taxes and everything. Like I'm like, I was trying to give so much benefit of the doubt. So I had so many lenses going on at the same time, and just different parts reacting to different things, and almost like an internal war of like, this doesn't feel right, but it's okay. So just right off the bat, how money was being handled, the labeling of the church, the throwing out of like terms that felt like they shouldn't be carelessly thrown out, like shaman and stuff, where I'm like, there's a bunch of white people here. And like that doesn't match from what I'm like learning from these books. And I just think we're being careless with words, and we need to be careful and honor where these words came from. And I'm just kind of like being vague right now, but there was a lot of red flags in the beginning and I chalked it up to just an eagerness to collaborate and be in a healing space, and not everybody was being careful with words, and just a lot of just letting it go. Like, we're all here for all the right reasons, and this should be great once the nerves kind of settle down. But it then became like the leadership was very egotistical and flawed, and it took me a while to really come to terms with that fact.
Into the first episode, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened, or how you found them, and what the story of everything?
Sure. And I have no idea what I said in the first episode, because I think I was still pretty deep in the shock of it all. So just to bullet point, I was on a journey to learn more about plant medicine and how it can help with healing trauma. I'm a trauma therapist, and I have had trauma, and was very curious, had a hard time finding a community, found one that did different ceremonies with different plant medicines, and just went in at a curiosity, and for the most part had a good first experience. There was definitely, to come back to your question, Virginia, there was definitely some red flags that I just kind of ignored. Had a good experience and kind of stuck around for different meetings, and then there was this course that was formed, that was supposedly, let me backpedal. There was a course formed after I decided to sign up for some classes with some shamans from Peru that they flew in, and was just really blown away by that experience. It was very beautiful, and I'm to this day very glad I experienced that. After the shamans left, they decided to make a whole course out of it with the people that ran this church, and it asked me to sign up. And I think they were attracted to the fact that I'm a therapist, and they wanted to like promote more. There was several therapists in this cohort, I guess, or tribe, they wanted to call it, that were there. And so we were all kind of handpicked for this first class. And it was through this class, it's supposed to be a year-long class, but I left early, that I was like face to face with like the unsafeness that I mentioned. It just demanded a lot of revealing of heavy trauma, and then using those stories against you, a lot of bypassing of the pain of the trauma, a lot of just really inappropriate kind of like ritualistic yelling your trauma in your face, and side talking of like, your spirit asked for this, and just a lot of blaming for your trauma. And I think for somebody who has never had good trauma healing, trauma therapy, they could be easily caught in like, well, I guess it's my fault, and bypass the very important experience of validating your pain and being authentically angry at any perpetrator, and healing from those experiences of slowing down, looking back, and really just being like, that really was terrible, and I'm sorry you went through that. It bypasses all that, and it's just yelling and get that trauma out, and your soul signed up for this pain, and just like the weirdest like, and it just took off because in addition to that, and I don't know what I said in the first episode, the instructors later on, we found out, because several of us left, were playing around with LSD. They like literally weren't in their right minds. And it did feel like something was off, and it just felt really, it just energy wise felt super unsafe. There was a lot of signs that we joked about, those of us that left, we joke about when we left, but there was truth to those jokes where they restricted food. They were like, no, you can't eat yet. You can't eat. We were there from like 9 a.m. to like 2 a.m. during some of these ceremonies. They restricted food. I have kids at home. One is medically complex. There were so many times where like, I just need to go home. I can't sleep here. I have to help out with my kid in the morning. And they're like, yeah, we'll move the cars. And it just like took forever to like get my, like everything. You felt trapped. You felt hungry. And we, again, like, many of us who left had a really good sense of humor about it, and that's how we healed from it. But it really was very cult-like.
I mean, just hearing some of the stuff sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
All in the name of healing and becoming a shaman or a shamanic healer. And like we found out later, we did so much research. We interviewed a woman named Joan Wilcox, who is absolutely amazing. And we're like, Joan, we're like learning about the mesa. She's like, it's actually not called a mesa. Like, she's like, it's called this. We're learning about all these traditions, like what is true, what is not. And she was very sweet because she's not going to throw other healers under the bus. So she didn't talk crap about them at all. She just was like, all I know is that this is the way that I was taught and this is how I teach, and just kept like redirecting back to like, and then other shamans we talked to, we interviewed the ones that actually came to us for the original class too. And again, everybody was super sweet. Like they're not going to talk crap about anybody else, but just kept it like, if you're not, one of the shamans said to me, if you're not in your joy the majority of your healing process, you're not in the right place. And he just couldn't, like, I don't think it's in their way to like talk negatively about another person's way, but he just kept bringing it back to like, it just doesn't sound like this was your place to heal and place to learn. You weren't in your joy. So I felt like I loved how because I actually wanted somebody to shit talk with me, but like I wasn't getting that. And it was good because it helped me understand like there's so many different communities out there, and like who knows, maybe somebody got a lot out of that process. It felt very cult-like, very scary to me, and opposite of trauma healing, traumatizing, really.
Yeah, it almost sounds like they were breaking you guys down in a way to build you in a certain way, or to give you beliefs about this is the way.
Yeah, and it was afterwards where I discovered, when I left, I heard about people still in there, and I was really concerned for them. And it wasn't gossipy. I was just like, I wasn't trying to keep tabs, but I was listening because some people were still in, but talking to us. And one fella like quit his job to because they wouldn't give him the time off to continue the thing, so he quit his job. I'm like, this is cult-like. People are quitting their jobs there. Then another woman experienced just like a lot of family riff and a breakup, and I'm like, I think if she wasn't in this wouldn't be happening to her. So that's very cult-like to me. And it was just like, and then the kicker for me is when I got really mad, when I think it was after I even interviewed with you for the first season, I found out that a young woman during one of their retreats overseas was assaulted, and they did the whole like blaming her. And she just was held up alone for 2 days till they flew home, like scared to come out. Like that is something I learned, and it's hard for me to digest, but it's true that in many of, especially these plant medicine communities that take trips, there's so many stories out there of women getting assaulted. because you're under the influence and vulnerable.
Yeah. That must be so rough and
Yeah.
probably like scary too, and you feel probably alone and very vulnerable.
Yeah. To go to a place for healing and to be re-traumatized. It reminds me of all the work I do. I do a lot of work with military sexual trauma and research around it. And it just reminds me of that. You're like, these are supposed to be your protectors and you were harmed by them.
Research that Stine and I were doing before the conversation, I just want to read you a list of red flags for cults because it's interesting that you're bringing it up. And I was like, well, we're not really talking about cults necessarily, but do they fall into toxic spiritual communities category? Yeah. And I'm not saying this is necessarily exactly what you went through, but there's so many similarities. So one is being cut off from family, encouraging cutting off communication with loved ones, elevated leaders or a leader claiming to have special gifts, or there's a hierarchy, so only they have access either to higher levels of knowledge or enlightenment or whatever. There's a right way and a wrong way of doing things, and only they have the answer. Asking for money, purchasing their programs, selling their services, donations, even at risk of placing that individual in some financial deficit or harm. Or saying things like, well, karma will be cleared if you pay X amount of money, or you'll get to the next level.
Yes.
Does this sound familiar?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah. And then I called them on it. I was like, you claim to be a church and you claim that some of your income goes to the communities that you your plant medicine from. That paper trail, where's that? Who are you giving to? No answer. You claim you're a church and that you offer scholarships and that there's donations for those who can't afford your services. Can I apply for one? Well, that's not until next year, even though it's on the website.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, before I blew up, and I don't know what I told you in the first episode, but I was on a Zoom call with them during one of their integration discussions and lost my shit. I like something came over me, and I think it was honestly a part of my spiritual alignment, my guides that have been trying so hard to talk to me that entire time. Like something shifted and clicked, because behind the scenes I was talking to those that were leaving or had left, and there was like a plan not to like disrupt anything and just kind of give them benefit of the doubt, see where they're at. And I disrupted everything. I like blew up, and I don't know what happened, but it's on a recording. Like I feel like I was channeling a tell-off. I was like, and you did this and you did this and you did, and like it was really like I watched myself on video afterwards. And I was like, I look possessed, and not in a bad way, just like stoic and matter of fact, like I'm in a court of law, super calm, even keeled. But when I exited out and I said, and I want nothing to do with this place. I want no mentioning of me, no connection to my businesses. I release you and goodbye. And so like hung up abruptly and completely lost it, like laid on the ground, like my whole nervous system was shaking. So I didn't feel calm, cool, and collected, but I definitely looked like something came in my body, told them off, and then that was it. It was wild. But yeah, that everything you just listed, yep. And I'm just so angry still for those that are still there or were damaged even more and maybe have left since, I hope.
What do you think keeps people in?
Trauma, being lost, feeling like they're not seen, feeling different. Trauma makes you feel like there's something wrong with you all the time. It's like this nagging bug. And when you're in a group of people where like you feel seen and like there's answers, and it's not like modern medicine, you don't need to go to this counselor or this, like just come here. That's quite appealing, and it can be very healing. That's what's so sad about it. But when you have a high ego leader who's dipping into LSD, I'm trying to be funny, but it's not funny.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, is it kind of that too, that the leader plays this role, right, in keeping people in a toxic situation? It's the charisma or the inflated ego, which comes across as maybe not an inflated ego, but like as like confidence.
Yeah.
And don't you, if you're looking for answers and you're trying to find community, aren't you going to look to the confident person?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, just look at politics in general, and people who live in fear will align with those that feel to them very confident.
Yeah. Another thing that, I mean, I kind of looked at was, well, why do people join these communities? Why do they stay in them? And I don't know. I kind of had some mixed feelings about it because I made it sound like the person was weak.
Yeah.
They listed a bunch of things, and I'm not comfortable with that. But like, so I'll just give you what they listed: anxiety, substance abuse problems, insecurities, feeling vulnerable, um, and what they talked about was just like that these organizations or groups were able to just brainwash people. And again, I don't, that's very, it sounds victim blaming. So I don't, I have mixed feelings about these characteristics because I think we all have insecurities and we all have some level of anxiety. And, so I don't know. What do you think?
I love how you led with that. It makes people appear weak, because I had a reaction to that, and I'm like, that's so interesting, because the people who left with me, and even some of the people that remained, were some of the strongest people I've ever met, and had lived through some shit like we all have. And so I think that's why, and I don't feel weak. I feel like I was blindsided and led in a wrong direction and trusted the wrong people, but I don't feel weak at all. Um, and I didn't at the time either. I felt like curious and wanting to know different ways of healing and willing to kind of ignore some red flags along the way. But I can see where that list was compiled as well, because there are some situations like that as well. But it feels to me like some of these research articles are those like sitting behind a computer, like studying different real life stories and coming to their own conclusion without actually experiencing it. Like there is quite a lot of strength in these communities. And yes, some of them are possibly brainwashed, but there's a powerful thing called groupthink. Like when you're just kind of with a bunch of people for long enough and things are normalized, you don't question them anymore. You don't listen to your gut instinct. It happens. Doesn't mean you're weak, just means you're human.
Thank you for saying that. I just, I'll give you a quick example to your point. I mean, about 20 years ago, I was working for a nonprofit in Chicago, and it was like my first job out of grad school. And I'm also a therapist. And so I was surrounded by people with degrees and very knowledgeable. And I was wide-eyed and I was like, oh my God, these people are awesome. They're all so smart. And I remember this just popped into my head as we were talking that, part of our training was they would bring people in to do workshops or team building things. And one of them was a person who I think was like a trauma specialist. I don't know how much research went into like finding out too much about this lady, but let me tell you, at the end of the day, I felt extremely traumatized. I was just like, I never want to go through this again. It was awful because some of the stuff like that was coming up was like, it was almost like doing therapy that I didn't sign up for. I'm like, I don't want to talk about my trauma, but you're forcing me to do it in front of my colleagues, and then there was an exercise where you'd have to scream at somebody in their face about some kind of rage that you had. And I had this woman screaming at me who was actually, ironically, a supervisor there. So she outranked me and I had to let her scream at me, like in my face. And it was awful. And I kept looking around at people like, is anybody else like feeling uncomfortable with this? Because I'm very uncomfortable. And I don't know how this is helping us build a team here. And what's the point of this? I don't know. Maybe I just missed the explanation for it. But I just remember like kind of at the end of the day saying, well, they know more than me. I don't, like I'm looking up to these people. They're the experts. I'm fresh out of school. What do I know? And that was just one day.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if this was like, if I had been there for years and this was just like a weekly thing that we had to participate in? Well, then, I mean, I think that's what we're talking about here. You can easily get sucked into it. And I didn't really consider myself to be a stupid person or a person that just didn't know how to think for herself. I was just like, everybody else seems okay with it. I guess I am too.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. I'm sorry you went through that. That's horrible. But you named so many different things that are like, and this is my biggest complaint, that are opposite of trauma healing, that are actually activating trauma. And that's where it's like the somatic therapy piece in me is like, this is how we've been doing it wrong all these years. We think we have to do exposure therapy right off the bat. We think we have to like fight, to get it out. And it's like, why don't we try to slow down and just get curious about how it's affecting our nervous system for a bit without going deep into the story and into our vulnerable spots? Like ease into it, people.
Have you watched Escaping Twin Flames or the Twin Flame Universe on Netflix?
Yes. Yeah. I've seen a lot of different specials since I've left. And, here's one red flag. Speaking, I do want to get into Twin Flames because that's a really good documentary. But one red flag was before I went into this experience, I watched the Hulu, I think it was on Hulu, Teal Swan documentary. I don't know if you know Teal Swan. Yeah. And left with this like really weird feeling in my stomach of like, okay, there's so much that this person has built that I actually think is really quality. And however, yes, there's editing. I want to be fair. There also feels like at some point, maybe this person became a little bit egotistical and isn't aware that that's like helping them make some really poor decisions. So I'm just being really careful here, but it just, either way, for me personally, I left being like, I will never participate in anything with that person. That feels very like not where I want to align or be along with. Approachable Healer is me. It's very open, whatever is, I look at the client as the expert, right? And their healing journey, not me. So that was in my pit of my stomach. And when I was in the course, the year-long course, and starting to feel in my gut, this doesn't feel right, one of the leaders suggested to me that I take her course, that they were looking at my traumas and they're like, you need to go to Teal Swan and take her course. My stomach lit up so bad that I almost threw up immediately. I was like, oh no. And it was like almost as if this is true, like all my guides were like, look, no, stop, go. Like that moment, that should have been it for me, because I felt it in my body, like this, no, if this is who's leading me and that's their suggestion, that is so opposite of who I am. Trying not to judge here, but just like, that was my big red flag. But yes, that documentary, The Twin Flames, wow. People need to see it. Yeah.
They do. Do you have thoughts on it? I'm putting you on the spot, Jenny.
No, it's been a bit since I've seen it. I just know that my takeaway was like, who is the guy who is like the main person? I forget his name. I don't even want to say his name. He doesn't.
I know. Yeah.
He was like, it's kind of like the hidden narcissist, like he like slithered his way into this like thing, and he had a very smart woman next to him who, for her own reasons, like trauma bonded with. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know what my thoughts are other than it was like the perfect alignment. It feels to me like when there's like so much in the environment, it produces this horrible plague, right? Like there's like enough elements in the mix that are really like sneaky and almost evil feeling combined, and then it just spread, and the picture of it was like, this is going to make you feel better, but it was total opposite. That whole thing is just scary.
It
Stina, you
is.
watched it too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I watched it recently. And I also watched their website not too long ago. And you can see on their website, they're kind of promising and putting out their information very well. So I understand why people kind of believes it, because they have so many stories about, oh, well, this worked for these people. There's a lot of people too that is kind of what do you call it? Acknowledge that it worked in a sense. But for the people that haven't seen it, it's about two people started or like promised other ones to find their twin flame if they took their courses. And when they found their twin flame, they can get upgraded to become a teacher or elevated teacher or something like that for others to find their twin flames. But behind the scenes, both of them, the main people, were kind of telling the twin flames how they are going to be perceived and what they should do. And if they do not do as they want to, they are getting tossed out of the group. And they have to leave their families, say goodbye to them because they have a trauma response, or like all the families have given them some trauma and they should let go of them. Um, yeah. Yeah.
Stina, that actually, like, it's interesting because I had a lot of thoughts in my walk this morning, and like leading up to this podcast and interview, and what you just said there, just highlighting that the whole story of the existence of twin flames, leaving the family because they're toxic. That, I don't know how to put this in words, but that's been what's been bothering me this whole time since my experience is like being told that they're toxic, so come heal here even though here is toxic. And as a trauma therapist, like, sometimes, not every family, it's quite healing to go into the toxic in your own family and find ways to compromise, to find ways to work through that. Like, that I feel like is what lifts your soul up, is that despite feeling like they hurt you, depending on the narrative and what kind of hurt it can be quite healing to work through some of those pains. It can be very empowering to like face somebody in your family who, I had this experience recently with somebody who politically doesn't align with me, and I just was really upfront, like, it's painful to hear you say all these things when I'm the kind of family that benefited from some of the things that this politician helped us with, and told them a real story, and they paused and tearfully were like, I'm really sorry, I had no idea. That filled my soul. It wasn't that I was right, it was that I was seen. And so when we have these cult like things saying leave your family and come to us and heal here, you're not letting those people have those experiences. You're adding to their fear.
It's so opposite of healing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just creating more distance and more detachment from the very people that, okay, maybe they hurt you, but how else can you work it out?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point also, I keep thinking throughout this whole conversation, of like domestic violence situations and domestic violent partnerships. And one of the signs is like, okay, well, you're cut off from your family.
Yeah.
And friends.
Yeah.
It's like a power move, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And sometimes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to hear it.
Well, it reminded me also of, we had another guest who was brief. She touched on it briefly. I'm wondering if we should kind of ask her a little bit more about her experience, but she was in a psychic school. and she talked about, like going through the classes and how, like, I think they were exploring just, I forget what it's called. There's a specific term, and I think we might have learned it too somewhere along the way. Family, what was it?
Oh, soul families or
Mm.
Soul families, thank you. Yes, soul families. But also there were these, what were the things that we were trying to clear? Do you guys remember? They were like, something connected to family and how they were responsible for certain traumas or our pain or our suffering or something. And it was kind of like not explicitly told to people, if I'm saying, I hope I'm not putting words in this person's mouth, but so they were not explicitly told you need to disconnect from your family, but it was like encouraged. And it was kind of like a thing amongst the students of like, because I found out my mother in a past life murdered me and I'm still carrying pain from that. And this is a karmic relationship. And so now I'm mad at her and I'm not going to talk to her.
Yeah.
I cut
I'm
her
so
off for like a
lucky.
year.
Yeah.
And it was, again, not explicitly told to them that this is what they needed to do, but people were walking around, I think, with this idea and this notion of like, again, the group think like, oh, this is, that person did it, that person did it. I'm going to do it too because I'm ticked off with my mom, so I'm not going to talk to her.
Yeah.
And people cut off family members.
Yeah.
And this was cool. It was like, yeah, that's part of your growth period. And so it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so careful around this stuff because sometimes family members need to be cut off. And I do have a lot of clients I help with that. Like, it makes sense. Like, this just isn't going to serve you ever in this life. And it's very sad. Right. But for the most part, there's a lot of growth that can happen just by engaging in that family member. And then the whole like past life, mother murdered me. I have heard that in so many different spiritual circles. I've taken mediumship courses and psychic courses. I've heard that a lot. And it always bothers me because I'm just like, it's the same reason why when I have a client in front of me and they're like, well, I'm a Cancer and they're an Aquarius. And so it's never going to work. And I'm just like, okay, I'm not against all of these theories, but like you just like there's fear in there and you're using these definitions as a reason why you don't want to connect. That's what I see. I don't see that there's two different signs that traditionally don't get along. So you're just going to jet now. Where is your journey in that? Where's your wisdom and learning? Where's you trying to maybe be the different one where you do make it work out and you learn a lot along the way? There's so much fear in like working through your own shadow work that when you get permission to jet or disconnect from family members that are difficult for you, oh, the psychic teacher said I should because in a past life, okay, well then that's my reason, rather than like maybe I should try to work this through because this is my soul's journey this lifetime, is to like see how we can get along despite all this.
that is so beautiful that you said that, because I think there's a lot of people that use that as an excuse, either like the zodiac signs or what other people says that, oh, well, yeah, I shouldn't be doing this, so I'm not.
Yeah. It's fear. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard to sit with as a clinician. I have like my clinical hat on and I hear it from my younger clients and I'm like, stop living in your fear. Go be brave. Make mistakes. Who gives a shit? You live this life one time as you. Make it messy because messy is beautiful, man.
That's awesome. And it's avoidance, right? Like it's an excuse just to avoid the problem and like I don't want to deal with it, so I'm not going to. And when you're talking about cutting people off, like I agree 100%. Sometimes you have to. But look at all the work that you're going to do before that decision.
Yeah.
How much work, how much processing, how much are you facing that pain, being in that situation before you're like, okay, it's time for me to go.
Yeah.
But you can't jump from, like somebody says you can cut them off because they murdered you in a past life. And you're like, all right, cool, I'm done. I have to talk to my mother again.
There's no wisdom that you've gained.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Yes, so these spiritual communities, I think, encourage that. A lot of bypassing.
Yeah. So then how do we help people that are listening to this and they're like, "Oh man, I think I'm in one of these and I kind of need to get out." What like what do you recommend? I mean, I know you've talked about like listening to your gut and kind of following that, and like you said, I think it takes a lot of courage to kind of be like, "Oh, this really isn't for me. I'm already in it. Everybody seems to be okay with it. I'm not okay with it, and I think I need to go." Like to muster up that courage to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's this woman named Courtney who's a somatic therapist who I've talked with, who helped me, honestly. I sought her out because she specializes in spiritual abuse as a somatic therapist, and had a few sessions with her, and found my brave energy by listening to my body more closely. So with her help. So I would say, like, how do people get out? Find a good therapist who is well versed in this. Not a better help kind of text therapist. Sorry to diss on that, but I hear podcasts and I hear advertisements for that, side note, and it drives me batty because they're like, and if you don't like your therapist, you can just switch. I'm like,
It's
where's
terrible.
that?
It's awful. People, please stay away from BetterHelp.
But anyway, and it's killing private practice is why I had to, anyway, whole other podcast. But find a good therapist who's well versed in spiritual abuse and communities. And people do specialize in this, especially if they're like creative arts based or somatic based, or just have a really strong understanding of trauma and can help you hold space for your pain and your questions and let you come answer you need to come to in that moment. That's it. But also, there's been some spiritual communities that I've eyes wide open chosen to stay in for the time being, but was able to like tunnel vision and not like notice the other stuff that bothered me, but it wasn't so toxic or so harmful that I needed to leave. It wasn't like a safety concern. It was just a difference of opinion, really. And like also knowing like that's not good for me, but over here is good for me. So I'll stick with this, knowledge and this connection for the time being. So it's kind of a two answer thing. One is just if it's not so bad, there's just a few red flags or whatever. Like if you're getting something from it, just keep getting that one or two things from it, but also create an end date at some point. Like you do want to try to find your next place to go to learn and heal. The other one is find a good therapist that is well versed in how to heal, or help you heal with spiritual abuse is, I think, essentially what we're talking about.
Say talk about it too.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Talk about it.
Yeah. I don't think the community that left the place I was at would have talked about it had I'd not had that explosion. But then also prior to that, I forget how it started, but it started with somebody else, not me, talking about like, hey, are you noticing this too? And it kind of led this like secret society behind the scenes to be like, yeah, me too. And like, that's a really good point. Just start talking about it, asking questions, getting curious, like start questioning.
I bring it up because I wasn't in a toxic spiritual community, but I was in a toxic work group and something was coming up. But the way that, people were like not talking to each other and everybody had different pieces of information about what was happening. And I thought, well, I think we all need to talk about this. Like, why are we all keeping it secret when it's affecting us and we need to make a decision here? And all I had to do was open that door and it was a floodgate.
Wow.
Floodgate. I mean, it kind of takes that one person to just be like, can we talk about this? Like, does this feel weird to anybody else? Just feeling it out. You never know.
Excellent example. Very good point. Yes.
So how can we find, like, for people that like, we don't want to scare people away from exploring spirituality, signing up for classes and joining spiritual communities. So Any thoughts on like what you think a good spiritual teacher, like what qualities do they have?
I really appreciate some of the ones that I've had in the past and currently, like Joan Wilcox. Somebody who feels to you like they could give her I mean, this is going to sound so callous, but they could give her like it's not going to make or break them if you sign up for their course. Right? They're not like really trying to pull you in and convince you need it. It's more of just like, here it is. Here's how much it is. Here's a payment plan if you need it. I'll be over here busy teaching. Sign up or don't sign up. Like, that's a good sign, right? It's not like this, like, already kind of like pulling you in and love bombing you. Like, I felt personally in my community a little oddly love bomb in the beginning. We really need you. And then I didn't even mention this. They made me a space holder, which was like a special, like only a few of us got picked, right? So there's that, it's creepy looking back. But a good person would just, they're professional about it. They're aligned with who they are aligned with and how they teach. They are confident and they don't absolutely desperately need your income. It's more of just like, come on in or don't. And if it's not a paid thing, it's more of just like a gathering of people that are like-minded. Make sure it's a shared conversation and not just one person's opinion. I think there's a misunderstanding with how much we put so many different, I mean, and some people, I don't know, I don't want to like dip too far into different like cultural ways of having spiritual connection, but for me personally, I like a good community and a good conversation. I feel like that in itself is uplifting and raising vibration, so to speak. And I learn so much about myself when I hear a different opinion that differs from mine. And I value that. And that's my spiritual growth. That's where I like to grow, and not just sitting there listening to a lecture for 4 hours and then, doing individual stuff on the side. That doesn't feel right for me. So a good spiritual leader shares the conversation.
I think you're talking about a sense of humility.
Yeah.
And like a sense of like integrity,
Mm-hmm.
Genuineness, maybe a willingness also to kind of just, you could feel when someone is genuine or when they're trying to like maybe put this persona in front of you of like, I'm healed, I'm above everybody else, don't question me, no questions.
Yes. Yes. That's a sign of a scary healer.
And there are some scary healers out there.
I love, if anybody's on Instagram, there's an Instagram page called Healing from Healing, and it cracks me up. It's so funny. But they also like are a group of people who I think very much have been through similar things like I have. And they do talk a lot about how some of these ayahuasca communities like put on display, they videotape people's journeys. And they're like, why would you do that? That's somebody's sacred like experience. And why on Instagram? Like, this is just gross. That's just one of many things Healing from Healing puts out there. They're very funny too.
Any final thoughts?
I think just if you find yourself in one of these communities that isn't right for you, just know you're not alone. To anybody listening to this, just please know you're not alone. And maybe be the one who starts asking questions and looking around. And if you're shut down immediately, like, don't ask that question, that's a red flag right there. And there are places and there are people that can help you kind of figure out your way out. It's just a matter of finding them in your community or online now that everything's online. There's plenty of people who specialize in spiritual abuse and would love to help you out. It's hard. It's so vague because people might be in certain types of spiritual communities that are centered around either plant medicine or yoga or whatever. So there's a wide variety of spiritual communities and a wide variety of the toxicity level of them. But overall, there should be somebody in your community that can help you kind of figure out your way out professionally.
I'll just add to that. look for someone that's done their own work. Just
Yeah.
as like you're trying to find a good therapist and you're looking around, it's like one of those things where you have to see, like, has that person done their own work? And I think for a spiritual teacher, you kind of have to look at that too.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you being with us and sharing your time. Is there anything like, can people find you, reach out to you? Where are you at these days? And what would you like to offer?
I am in a big transition time in my life. Eventually people can find me. People can find me on approachablehealer.com easily. And I will communicate and talk, and happy to do different kinds of services that I offer on that website. I'm in a transitionary period, so that those spots are limited right now. I'm finishing up a book and hopefully will publish it soon. It's finally in good hands, found a good editor, so we're almost done. But I will be more working on like healing from trauma and mixing in different types of stuff that we've all been trained in. And yeah, so I'm going to fine tune a little bit more of Approachable Healer. But for now, you can find me on my website. But I will be out there in a different way very soon.
All right. We're looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Vision Chat. You can find more about us at visionofprofoundhealing.com, where we offer readings, courses, and classes.